Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. Feel free to use the chat box for any questions. If you're unable to get to them during the presentation, they will be answered at the end. My name is Braden Knudsen and I'll be your host for this webinar. We'd like to remind everyone that these webinars are being recorded and posted online to our website as well as the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel to receive updates when new videos are posted, and also if you have not yet subscribed, we have an email list that you can sign up on from our website to receive email updates about upcoming webinars. Today we will be pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation titled Discovering Digital Family and Locality Histories. James Tanner has a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Utah. He received a Juris Doctorate degree in law at Arizona State University. He served for 2 years as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army and 39 years as an Arizona trial attorney. He has previously owned a retail computer business and an Apple Macintosh software company. James has over 32 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona Family Search Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. He has presented at expos and conferences around the U.S. and Canada. James has 7 children and 33 grandchildren.
Howdy, this is James Tanner. We're back again for another webinar from the Brigham Young University Family History Library. These webinars are being recorded and uploaded as videos to the YouTube channel for the BYU Family History Library, and we're encouraging everyone to subscribe. We have almost 200 videos up, so shortly we should have somewhere around 200 videos. So that if you look at the number today and if you're watching this like in the future sometime, you might watch how many we end up with up there. We're going to talk about discovering digital family and locality histories. So first of all, we have some let's say jargon words that maybe everybody doesn't recognize. And we're going to talk about what is a surname book. Now, this is kind of a generic term for books written about a person and his or her descendants or ancestors. There are at least tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of these books out there that have been compiled by individuals about an ancestor. And as the definition here indicates, they either document their descendants or document their ancestors. So you'll find a book, for example, written about a famous person like Washington, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. It'll talk about his ancestors, but you'll also find books about people that are totally obscure and that also talk about their ancestors or their descendants. And there are lots of these books, and they're usually privately published, which means that they're not very commercially viable. You don't go to a major book publisher with a surname book full of genealogy and expect to have the book printed. Most of the time, when they're privately published, they're either sold by subscription to family members, or they're paid for by an individual who then has a stack of them in their garage waiting for people to sell, or their basement waiting for people to buy them. Now, first of all, another thing that would happen is this depends on the number of copies. Sometimes I'm familiar with books that exist in only one copy. The person who wrote the book has only taken it to a publisher that does like single copy printing, and he has one copy of the book published. Sometimes, though, there's, say, a half a dozen or 12 or whatever, but there can be almost none of these books available. And on the basis of the number of copies of the book, many would be considered rare books because they are difficult to locate. And what I have tried to do over the past few years is encourage people who have these books, who have one of these surname books, to check with their local library and see if that book is in the library. Now, I wouldn't put it into like a public library. I would be more selective, I would give it to a university special collections library, or at least a university library where there was a possibility. But here's what happens when a book is published privately. The only way that we know that a book exists if it shows up in the back in the history of books in the United States. There was a company called R.W. Boker, and Boker put out a big compilation called Books in Print. It was a big oversized book. When I was using books in print before computers came along, it was about 1.5 to 2 inches thick, and it was probably 10 by 12, 10 by 14 inch, whatever, big book. And in this book was listed all the books from all the publishers around the country who had any book that was still for sale. A book that was not listed in the books in print was considered to be out of print. Well, surname books like this with very short runs, as it's called, a run of books meaning there's very few published copies, are instantly out of print, because the second that they're out and printed, there's no publisher with a load of books out there waiting to distribute more copies. So an out-of-print book then can become a rare book if for some reason it's the number of copies is very, very limited, or another thing that has to happen, though, the book has to be very desirable, but a lot of these books could be very desirable had anybody known they existed. So part of the process here of getting these books out of the rare book category is to have them digitized and included in one of the large websites. We'll talk about that a little bit, but initially also a person who publishes a private book like this, a surname book, should also look at the possibility of having the book put in the library as soon as possible, a major library like a university, as I mentioned. The reason for that is that the library will then catalog the book. The book will then become part of what we call WorldCat, which is the big online catalog, and it will be then able to be found. Somebody will actually be able to find a copy of the book. That's really the problem that occurs with these various surname books out there. So there are probably millions of these books out. I say millions, I'm just guessing, but there's really no way of knowing how many there are. But when I do any search for genealogy books, I always come up with numbers in the millions on Google or on WorldCat. So there are a lot of those books out there. And the problem with the books is that they are seldom in catalogs, or if they are, there's only a single copy of the book available at a library. Now, the Family History Library in Salt Lake City has made a practice of collecting these books. So they would accept a donated copy of the book to be put in the Family History Library. That would be one of my primary suggestions if you happen to have one of these books around and it's not in your, you can't find it any place online or its existence. Now, here's a citation of one surname book. This is a book called Genealogy of the Descendants of Thomas Tanner, Sr. of Cornwall, Connecticut. It was printed back in 1893 by somebody named Elias F. Tanner. And as a matter of fact, this particular family in Connecticut is not at all related to me. I have never found a connection with this particular family. It's entirely unrelated. But the interesting thing about it is that this particular book has been digitized probably hundreds of times. I find this book on almost any collection of online collection of digital books. So regardless of how difficult it might be to find the original copy of this book, it is so very much available around there, that around the internet, that anybody who wanted a copy of it could probably download one in just a matter of a few minutes if they went to look for it. But here what we see in the citation to this book is the author of the book, the title of the book, and the publisher of the book. And this is generally the information that we need in order to find a book online, and the way that it's going to be cataloged and found in a library if it ever ends up in a library. Now, there is, in fact, a tremendous issue here with copyright in the United States. The copyright law in the United States has basically been extended to the point where none of us who are presently alive will ever see a book come out of copyright that's published today. Even if you're very young, you'll never outlive the copyright. That was not the original intention of the copyright law, but that's the current situation. But older books, and particularly books published before 1923 in the United States, are out of copyright, and they may be digitized. However, if you are the author of or the owner of the copyright of a book, of a surname book, that was written by, say, your mother, father, and you inherited the book and the rights to that book from your parents or whoever, you can then have the book digitized and put up online by giving permission to have the book put up online. So here is the way that those books get online. If I find one, like I did just this last week or so, that was in the possession of one of my friends, and they said, well, I don't know what to do with this book. And I said, well, I do. Would you like to donate it to the library, to the BYU library? And they said, well, sure, that'd be great. Get it out of my house. I don't need it, and it might be preserved that way. And I said, yes, it will be preserved that way. And so I obtained a form from the library at BYU library that lets this person donate that copy of the book to the library, and then they have then donated that book to the library. It signed off on the form. I then took the opportunity to deliver the book to the library, and then the library will then take the book and catalog it. And in many cases, in this case that had a paper binding with one of those kind of like plastic spiral type bindings on it, and they will probably rebind it with a library binding and put it out on the shelf, and it'll be available in the collection. So this is a good process for thinking about preserving and helping all of these particular items, all of these particular books, these publications that are in that category to be preserved. So here's where these books have been digitized. This is a Google book search that shows the genealogy of the descendants of Thomas Tanner Sr. of Connecticut in a search. So there's that particular entry for that book. And once that book has been digitized and put in this format, then the book then becomes readable online. In this case, this copy of the genealogy of the descendants of Thomas Tanner ends up in a website called the Internet Archive, or archive.org. And the Internet Archive now has many millions of books online. And this is how the book would appear to be able to be read and used online. And actually, the entire book has been subject to what's called optical character recognition, or OCR. That means that every word in the book can be searched. And by searching on the Internet Archive, you can search within the book and search for any name or any term or place or whatever you want to do research with that particular book. It turns the book from a static book, which may have an index or not, into a completely searchable book that can be used and copied and downloaded and all sorts of things. In this case, on the Internet Archive, that book can be downloaded in a whole bunch of different formats. Here's the URL for that. It's archive with no s.org, and it's called the Internet Archive. Okay, so this, for example, is another, this is what it looks like inside that book if I took a little screenshot of the book. And unfortunately, some of these books have gotten a bad reputation among genealogists because they contain very few, if any, source references. And in this case, this particular book perpetuates some very common myths. The information here is general. and talks about tanners in general and the American tanners in general, and the information that it gives is not based on any kind of factual situation where people are actually have documented the arrival of the tanners in America or anything of the sort. And also it doesn't differentiate between different tanner families, because tanner is a name that originated in England out of an occupation, pretty obviously, and had origin in many, many different places in England. So there are many, many different families who are totally unrelated, all of whom have the same surname. So it's very interesting, but this kind of information is a little bit misleading in the fact that it kind of insinuates that all the tanners in the United States are now related in some way, which they are not. Okay, so if we go back into, for instance, the Family Search family tree, which is a unified family tree which contains a lot of that kind of information. Unfortunately, some of the information from these books has gotten incorporated into these online family trees. So when you're using one of these books, there's kind of two levels of criteria that you're looking at. First of all, you're looking at the book for its kind of historical value because it's an old book. But from a genealogical standpoint, the important thing is that to look at who is the subject, where does the information come from, and the date of the publication. So a book like this one, published back in the 1800s, basically, if the information is about people who were the contemporaries of the author, you have people that are living more than 100 years ago and probably lived early in the 1800s or maybe even into the 1700s. So those were people who were firsthand known to the author, and the information about them is probably about as accurate as any information we have. It's when they start going back in time, even before any of the people who are depicted in the book were alive, that we begin to get into areas where the information becomes less and less reliable without specific sources telling where the information was obtained and where we could go to verify that the information is correct. So how do you find these online surname books? Well, there are, as I mentioned, lots of them, and I've also mentioned a couple of places you can look. And the answer to that is books are books, and online collections of digital books include surname books. The larger collections of online digital books are going to, by the very nature of the fact that they are books, the surname books end up in libraries, libraries end up cataloging the books, then those collections of books, especially if they're out of copyright, become digitized and they become included in online digital collections like the Internet Archive that I just mentioned. So we just search the catalogs for surnames plus the words genealogy or history. That's the best way to find them. So if I were looking for books about tanners and even my own family, I would put, sometimes I will put the place where they predominantly lived. In my case, the old tanner family of my line came from Rhode Island. So I would search for tanner genealogy in Rhode Island, and that would give me keywords that would be included in a book that might pertain to my particular family. And so we can do those kinds of searches online. So some of the larger digital book collections include Google Books and Internet Archive, which I just mentioned a moment ago. There's one called the HathiTrust. It's HathiTrust.org. These collections of books are in the millions. They have millions and millions of books. Some specialized collections, FamilySearch.org has a books section, digital book. If you go to the search menu on FamilySearch.org, you'll find an item called books, and in that books collection you have over 300,000 books, and they are specifically books on genealogy and family history from the Family Search Library, the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, and from other genealogical libraries around the country. And then myheritage.com has a huge collection of books also. Now, since this particular presentation was put together a week or a couple of weeks ago, we have, Family Search has acquired another partner program with GeneNet. It's GeneAnet.com out of France. And the GeneNet has over 750,000 digitized books in its collection online. And they're from all over the world. So there's some big digital collections out there. First of all, we're going to look a little bit at Google Books. Google Books is a part of the Google search engine. So if you type Google Books into your Google search, you'll come up with the Google Books section. And what this does is it specifies to the search engine that you want to look at books, so it cuts out all the other material that might show up if you're looking for surnames and things like that. So then I can type in something like Tanner genealogy into the search engine here on Google Books. And once I do that, I will get a list of all the books that match my search term, just like I would with any Google search. In this case, I get about 18,500 results. There's probably about that many books out there that have genealogy information associated with various Tanner families. Now, like I said earlier, in order to get this more specific, I'm going to have to put in some additional book. And this is out of millions and millions of books on the Google book search. Google doesn't tell us how many books they have digitized, but the numbers once in a while come out, and it appears that they may have something over 30 million books digitized on Google. The other website that I mentioned earlier is archive.org. Archive.org has, at the time that this was prepared, had 10,439,943 texts. And when you look at those from the genealogical standpoint and do a search in their text portion of their program, I got, from Tanner Genealogy, I got 19 results. Now, that may seem like, well, yeah, you've got millions of books on there and you only got 19 on the Tanner Genealogy, but I actually got a lot more genealogy books. The problem here in doing the searches like this is that you're relying on the cataloging and the way that the search engine is set up. And the fact that I searched for Tanner Genealogy may not bring up all the books that they have that would be pertinent to my genealogy. But the books that did come up were all books that you would want to have a look at if you were doing this kind of search. And also remember this, just because a digital book website doesn't have the books about my ancestors doesn't mean that they don't have it about your ancestors. The collections of these books are somewhat random, and so they could end up with books that are of great value to you, whereas they may not have anything that I'm particularly interested in. In addition, I've watched these websites over the last few years, and the Internet Archive, for example, the number of books goes up a million or so every few months, and the number of books there has gone up. Since the last time I did one of these webinars, it actually had gone up over 1 million volumes. So they continue to add to their collections, and so this is something you don't do just once, you do it repeatedly. Also vary your search terms. Study the way the search engine works and try adding modifiers. So if I had put Tanners in Rhode Island, or I'd put some other search in there, I would have gotten different results. Now, the HathiTrust is first of all, it does have kind of a strange name, and I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing it correctly. I think it's either the HathiTrust or HathiTrust, and I'm not sure even where the name comes from. But what this is a huge uh, consolidation of digitized books from university libraries in the United States. Okay, so this is primarily university libraries, and they have over 14, or at the time I did this, 14.7 million volumes. And of those, and if we do a search for Tanner genealogy, it came up with 80,849. So that's a little bit different than the search with Internet Archive, but that doesn't indicate that they have any more relevant books. It's just the way that their search engines are working and what kinds of things they're producing. So I'm obviously never going to go through a stack of 80,000. I'm going to have to put a few more search terms in and see if I can come up with more specific findings of the book. But these are all books that have the full text, and we're looking in all fields. In most of these, including the Internet Archive, you can get a more advanced search and get specific into the kinds of books that you're looking for. So since these are cataloged sites rather than searching full text sites, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, but mainly they're catalogs. That means that the number of books that come up are probably going to vary with your ability to guess what their catalog terms are, which is the case in any event. FamilySearch.org, like I mentioned, they have a little over 300,000 books right now that are fully digitized. And that list there, when you go to the books portion of FamilySearch.org, lists all the libraries that are involved in that project. They had 307,783 books at the time I looked at this when I prepared this slide. And when I do a Tanner genealogy search, I come up with 9,816 books in all their records. In each case, by the way, the books that we've found so far, except on Google, Google has different categories of books, but on Internet Archive and on the HathiTrust, if it's in the public domain area, and on Family Search, almost all of these books can be read online, and nearly all of them can be downloaded to your computer if you wish to do so, and use your computer to review the books. So there's a huge number of books. Here in the Family History Library on Family Search and the other family history centers around the world and these other catalogs here, this is a catalog of about everything that they hold. There are a number of books that came up right at the beginning of my direct line ancestors. So this is not something that you would think would happen. A lot of people, when I talk about surname books, they say, well, who would have written a book about my ancestors? I mean, I didn't know anything about it. I never heard of a surname book about my ancestors. And they're always surprised to find out that if you go back a little ways in your genealogy, that there's a very good chance that somebody's written a book about one of your ancestors, or two or three. I happen to have a huge stack of them for whatever reason. I have like 8 or 10 surname books from my family. And some of them I know about and I don't even have copies of because I have no idea. Like I said, sometimes these books are limited publication and I have no idea how to get a hold of a copy of the book. Now, MyHeritage, which you may not think of in this context, it is a huge genealogical database. And among all of the other sources they have, books and publications, they have over 447,000 sources that are in their category of books and publications that you can search directly on MyHeritage or will be attached to your family tree. If you have a family tree on MyHeritage, then MyHeritage will go ahead and search through all of these books and provide you with record matches of the sources that match the people in your family tree. in all these books. So they're essentially reading all the books from cover to cover and providing you with links called record matches that will go directly to each of the books that have been written about your family. I find this to be very interesting because actually they do find, and they find books that I didn't know about, which are interesting and very helpful. Uh, the the interesting thing here is, of course, Family Search does have a family tree, but right now their record hints do not include the books. So sometime perhaps in the future they'll integrate the books. Now, as time goes on, these different catalogs and these different companies enter into agreements with other entities. Recently, the Family Search, the organization of Family Search International, entered into a partnership with the Digital Public Library of America, and the Digital Public Library of America will be but will be featuring the digital collection of books off of the FamilySearch.org website. So if you go to the Digital Public Library of America, which is dp.la, that's the whole address, by the way, dp.la, and that will have, by the end of the year, they've indicated they'll have a searching all of the books on the FamilySearch.org catalog. So they're going to sort of cross-feed eventually on some of these larger websites. Now on MyHeritage, if I do that search, I ended up with 194,349 books for Tanner in their books and publications. So we've got a lot of books out there, and there's potential that I'm going to find a lot of information about my family eventually out of all those books. Now, I've mentioned briefly already the worldcat.org. WorldCat is a consolidated catalog, online catalog of thousands and thousands of catalogs around the world from libraries. So this is sort of the clearinghouse consolidated catalog of just thousands and thousands of libraries around the world. There's numbers I've seen that are very high. I keep looking around on the website to see if they give a number of the total number of libraries, and they don't, but I know the numbers have not changed for a long time, so I'm assuming that they are pretty well out of date anyway. But let's just say there's millions of libraries, probably one near you. Be very surprised if one of the libraries near you. But they have 2 billion catalog entries. Now that represents a tremendous amount of information. If I were to rank the websites that I think are the absolute most valuable for doing searches online, particularly in the light of doing genealogical searches online, of course I would include Google and its programs, but I would also in the top 3 include WorldCat, because WorldCat is by and far the place to go for information about the contents of the various libraries around the country, including the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, including the Brigham Young University Library, which is the second largest family history library in the world. And so, this is the place to go to get that information. If I do a Tanner genealogy search on WorldCat, I end up with about 1,549 results. Now, let me kind of explain again and make sure that understanding why there's so much of a variation between these. MyHeritage is searching every work, every word in every book. So they have done an optical character recognition of every book in their database. And so searching for Tanner or searching for Tanner genealogy will search for the number of times that either of those words appear, which of course is going to give you kind of an inflated a number of returns. In WorldCat, this is a catalog, and so the only way that Tanner or genealogy would have gotten into the catalog, or Tanner genealogy, for example, would be if some cataloger either with WorldCat or in one of the libraries, had cataloged the book under a catalog term of Tanner genealogy. So that's not nearly as likely to have happened as it would be if you're searching all the contents of all the books. So WorldCat does not search the contents of the books. It doesn't search every word. It is not relying on an OCR of every one of its 2 billion entries. It is relying on people having cataloged the books. So part of the game here in finding things in WorldCat is understanding the process of cataloging and how to use a catalog, just like you would do if you went to the library to try to find a book. And that's what you're doing in essence when you go on to WorldCat. So what I'm kind of indicating here is that we should expand our horizon. In other words, we have traditionally, as genealogists, been sort of locked into our own methods of research. It is not unusual. I have met a lot of people in the past who have based their whole genealogical file on a certain surname book that they had in their possession, and in essence copied the surname book into their genealogical file, which I would not recommend doing. I would make sure that all these people actually were related to me before I put them in. But that's not exactly what I did when I first started, but I would certainly recommend that to happen today. I did make an effort to try to determine whether the people I entered were related to me, but not in all cases was I successful in keeping out some of the people that had been traditionally added to other family trees, and I simply ended up with those names. But what we're trying to do here is get past this idea that surname books are somehow unreliable. They may be, but I don't feel they're any more unreliable than almost any other sources that we have out there. They do require you to make judgment decisions as to whether or not the information is accurate and complete, or even believable. But in any event, this is someplace where we should be looking. What I see in the libraries, and obviously I've been in the libraries now for years and years, is I will see the genealogists come in now and they go straight to the computers or they go straight to doing some other work. And I very, very seldom see anyone, even in a huge library like this, Harold B. Lee Library here at Brigham Young University, that ever picks up a book. And I think that's pretty tragic because a lot of times the books will have, if not, maybe the same information could be found online, but sometimes it's a lot faster to get it out of a book, and sometimes the books still have a lot of information that hasn't made its way on into online sources yet. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is look for local, county, and state histories. If your people lived in any kind of area for any period of time, there's a very high possibility that they ended up in a local, state, or county history. So we can't forget these sources as being a place where we can find information about our families. In some cases, I'm familiar with a local city history about a little town in Arizona where my family lived, and the book that was published about the history of the town just sort of systematically took out any reference to anybody in my family because there were some fights going on between the person who wrote the book and some of the members of my family. So that can happen. But in a lot of cases, what you'll find is that local politics and social issues aside, you may very well find your people in these histories. And I have seen almost like a jackpot where people have gotten the generations of their family names out of a local history book. So first of all, do a general Google search for the places that appear in your family tree. those places, the purpose of this is in part to verify that you have the right place names, that the places that you've written down in your family tree are accurate. And then an example, for here is a book on one of my ancestors that I did a search for. One of my ancestors lived in Rutland County, Vermont, and I did a search for a county history. I put in Rutland County history, and here came this book, History of Rutland County, printed back in 1868. And it says it embraces a history of each town, civil, ecclesiastical, biographical, and military. And it was printed in Burlington, Vermont, by somebody named Miss A.M. Hemingway, by the way, Hemingway. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that I think is invaluable, because here you have a book published back in 1868 doing biographies of people who are living at that time, obviously, and their immediate ancestors. One could go back, clear back to the origins of this county. People alive at that time could have been living in from the early to late 1700s. So that's possible that these people knew those people. So it's a good place to go to get information. Here's another example. This one was written by one of my great uncles. It's George Tanner's book called Colonization on the Little Colorado, and it's called the Joseph City region. Well, I would find this book, and how I found the book basically, is that my great-grandfather lived in Joseph City, Arizona. And so in looking for histories of Joseph City, Arizona, it's very easy to come across this particular book. And it does, in fact, feature and mention my great-grandfather, who was the father of the author of the book. So this is the kind of information. Now, another side view to this is that I now know that this book exists, and I knew that my great uncle essentially had written the book. So the question would be, and came to my mind, is where did all the information go that he used to write this book? And after doing a search for a while online and in the libraries, I discovered that the papers that he had, the background research papers that went into this and some of his other books, were stored in the University of Utah Library, and a copy had been made at the Northern Arizona University Library in Flagstaff, Arizona. So that book and the papers that went behind this particular book consisted of over 25 linear feet of documents sitting up in the University of Utah Library. And that was a tremendous amount more information about my great-grandfather and the other people who lived in this small town in northern Arizona. Okay, so here's another one. This one is on Montgomery County in Pennsylvania, in the Schuylkill Valley. By the way, I had to finally ask how in the world you said that, the name of that valley. But my daughter, who lives in Pennsylvania, finally coached me a little bit. I may not have it perfect, but it does sound pretty much like Schuylkill, is how they say it. So we'll see if I'm sounding very believable to you, any of you out there in Pennsylvania. But you can see some of the information that's here. They all have, a lot of these books seem to have endlessly long titles. That was kind of the hallmark of the old 1800s books, that they went on and on with the title. But it also helps us to find the book, because the titles are always represented, and they tell all sorts of things. So you may not have known that there were Swedes in your valley there in Pennsylvania, but that's where they were. And the key here to all of these publications is to keep searching. This is kind of the key for all of this, that you really need to continue to do searches over and over again. And it may seem very redundant, it may seem like it's not productive, but I have to remind everybody that these websites are not static. They are basically growing constantly, and new material is being added. And so an individual search will produce different results depending on the time that you search. So what I find today may be completely different that I find in another 6 months or even another year. Okay, well, thanks for watching today. This was another webinar from the Brigham Young University Family History Library on the campus in Provo, Utah, and remind you that these webinars are recorded and uploaded to the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. And if you subscribe to the channel, you'll get a notification from Google about the uploading of any new material. Thanks for watching today.
Thank you, James, for the wonderful webinar. And we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and remind you to go to our website to check out our schedule for upcoming webinars so you can join us next time. And we will see you then. Bye.